Well, looking at my post from my discussion on Canada and the United States, it looks like I got some interest, and I'm not surprised. The United States and Canada, for all our problems, we are connected in a way that when we hurt each other, we really hurt each other bad. We may not be the same, but we have, in some ways, a shared history. And for the United States, the problem, I remember when I started learning more about Canada was when I was younger. In the early 90s, Canada was really opening up towards the United States, Canadian TV shows. I remember in the early 80s or early 90s, Degrassi High, of course. If you were living in Chicago, New York, or New England, you probably remember that show. And then, of course, there was one of my favorites called Forever Knight about a vampire cop in Toronto, which is another one of my favorite. But in the early 90s, Canadian shows were starting to filter into the United States, which made me more interested in Canada. But then suddenly it pelted out, probably by the late 90s, early 2000s. But in that time, I started, and of course, Due South was another great Canadian show. But I did get a glimpse of our neighbors to the north, which is obvious. They are different in both mindset than the United States. And another disappointment I find in the United States is I've only found one book on the history of Canada in the United States, which would be considered rather good, but that's disappointing. In fact, I don't see in American academia, except if you're in New England, maybe Washington State or Plain State, much discussion about Canadian history or Canadian culture. Obviously, if you're living in Texas, you'll be more interested in Mexico. But the reality is this whole country really does need to look north and south also to Mexico to why we have issues there, because North America is our homeland, but for all three countries too. We all have to share this whole continent. We all have to deal with each other in a proper manner. And obviously, calling each the 51st state is not very. It goes back to manifest destiny of the 19th century in a very mean way. And as far as our ambassador to Canada, I was hoping he would have done something, Pete Hoekstra, because Hoekstra was born in the Netherlands, and Holland and Canada have a very special relationship because it was the Canadian troops that liberated Holland, not American, but it was mostly Canadian troops that liberated Amsterdam, Utrecht in the Netherlands. So I was kind of hoping Ambassador Hoekstra could have done something to ease it because the Dutch and Canadians have a special relationship. Unfortunately, it's turning out not to be working out as much as I thought it did. And Canada has much to be proud of, in particularly, which again most Americans don't really know, that 2 years before D-Day, a group of Canadian troops landed on the beaches near Dieppe, and they got blasted off the beaches, but they went there long before D-Day happened. So the Canadians have a very proud military history, that had a very proud history. So what do you think the future is? Again, we need to continue the discussion. I think the sniping between Trump and Carney, Trudeau and Trump, it's just the latest in its personalities. It goes back to Nixon, Trudeau, Reagan, Chrétien, and Bush. It's just the latest in the sniping that underlies tension in our relationship. We've had some good relationships, such as between Mackenzie King and Roosevelt, but it underlines the demand from Canadians, respect from the United States. Americans need to know more about Canada. And I think as technology and the available access, I think more Americans, I think, are waking up and trying to learn more about Canada. I'll discuss Mexico in another video, but my hope for is that, as I said just in my previous statement, is that as more Americans have access to technology, they, just like I was in the early 90s, will learn more about Canada. And in that long term, I think a greater understanding, not between the political classes, but among the people, will happen. Thank you, and have a good night.